Okay, welcome everybody to today's webinar. I always like to say today, tonight, or whatever time of day it is. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening. We've got a global audience here, so happy that you took the time to join us today. We know your time is valuable, and I think you'll be happy that you carved out this hour of some really good content based on what I've seen so far. And it's always nice to have the perspective of a CISO here on a very important topic. So we're going to be talking about innovation at the speed of cloud without compromising on security and compliance. My name is Mike Lennon, and on behalf of Security Week, I'm going to be your host, not necessarily the moderator. We have three great participants in the discussion today. We have Jonathan Jaffe. He's CISO at Lemonade. If you haven't seen them, they've been a hot startup in the insurance space. He's joined by Andras Cser. He's Vice President and Principal Analyst at Forrester. And we have our moderator, Patrick Bushor. He's a technical evangelist at Orca Security. So, Patrick, I'm going to go ahead and pass it over to you to get this fun discussion into action.
Fantastic. Thank you, Mike. And thank you everyone who's tuned in for about the next hour of your attention. We're really excited to be here. I'm really personally excited. I mean, seldom do I get to sit back and be a participant kind of in these discussions and hear from two really smart and experienced people. So from an agenda perspective, we're going to hear from Andras first. I'm going to ask him to introduce himself and a little bit of the work he does at Forrester. And then we're going to hear from him for about 20 minutes. And then we're going to pivot over and hear from Jonathan around some of his experience with Orca. So, Andras, I'm going to pass it over to you. Why don't you introduce yourself and get started?
Definitely. Thank you so much, Patrick. Thanks for having me today on today's webinar. Really exciting opportunity. There's absolutely a lot of ground to cover right today. I'll try to kind of go through my kind of slides and points here and kind of give you some kind of background and all that that we see here. So it is always a tumultuous time, right, in the cloud. One of the biggest challenges, right, is that we see here is just transition. Right. So if you looked at, the conversation 5, 6, 10 years ago, it would have been, should we move to the cloud? Should we not move to the cloud? Should we, kind of stay and kind of on the sidelines and watch what's going on? Or should we jump in? Today, the question is definitely yes, jump in. But the question is how, right? So some of the biggest concerns that we hear is just adding the word how should we move to the cloud. So it's not that should we move to the cloud, but how. What are the things that force or kind of put people into the position of wanting to go to cloud platforms. Right? So if you look at this slide, right, this little guy in the middle, right, within the red shorts, he's your organization, right? It typically sizes your organization, and the guy, the sumo player, the sumo kind of wrestler, right, in front of him is the cloud service provider, right? So it is absolutely an uneven battle, an uneven kind of handshake that we see here. And the CISOs and security folks are absolutely pulled in a lot of different directions, by the cloud. So, obviously the first thing is that the cloud pool, offers a lot of very good benefits: right sizing, downsizing, scalability, elasticity, a relatively lower cost of security for the equal amount of unit workload in the cloud. In the cloud, we estimate that if you use cloud-based workloads, the cost of security for those workloads would be, 30% less, than if you would have to have that workload in an on-prem or private cloud kind of operation. So that's, if you kind of add things up, right, that's going to present its significant, basically, potential for saving on securing your workloads, right? Number two, line of business is always procuring cloud services. There is no way out of this thing. It's just like if you look at expense reports, VPs and up, you often see like these the $20,000, $30,000 kind of monthly fees for some kind of cloud services that nobody knows where they are, what data they contain, how they are operated, what challenges, what security holes, threat surface increases they bring up, what kind of posture management, configuration challenges you might have. So that's definitely that out there that kind of makes CISOs' lives even more interesting. Number three, CISOs cannot say no all the time. I mean, you have to be an enabler as a CISO or security professional. You got to work with DevOps folks. You got to work with the cloud compliance, cloud orchestration, cloud architectural security platforms. You have to be part of the picture. You just cannot say, oh, well, we can't go to the cloud and just block this whole transition. Number four, cloud changes all the time, right? This is a gigantic problem. Even if you decided that, yeah, we're going to be able to check all the boxes, secure everything, chances are that your developers are actually going to be finding ways to kind of onboard and adopt using brand new services, infrastructure as a service, platform kinds of services that you'd have to really secure. A lot of times this is not possible, and really the underlying core platforms, infrastructure service platforms, core services just change. Like I did my infrastructure platform native security wave a couple of years ago and this year, and it's really staggering to see the number of artifacts that you have in a cloud for just security and configuration. So I think it's safe to say there has been 100% increase in the number and the level of complexity of all security controls that these, infrastructure as a service platforms such as AWS, Azure, GCP, IBM, and others actually provide. So again, this is just a race with time and shooting for a moving target. Number five, cost, right? So again, you gotta reduce costs, unifying, basically securing a unit of workload. And you're going to see 30% lower costs in our estimates for securing that unit workload in the cloud versus doing the same thing on premises. And then, as I mentioned, there's a lot of questions around the organizations, right, that work through this thing. We see buyers, being DevOps, IT Ops, IT security, procurement, compliance. Still have been, seeing some level of stakeholder resistance against the cloud, like the data protection is big, the data residency, privacy. It should all be a service-oriented approach for cloud services and cloud security services, and kind of forget this project-based kind of, plans of let's do this once and then forget about it. You can't, right? If your company is in the cloud and presumably that would also imply that your organization is using some kind of a continuous improvement, continuous delivery, pipeline-based project and a DevOps kind of mindset, agile development. This is not a time period with a beginning and an end, and you can kind of set and forget about it, right? This is an ongoing cycle, an ongoing kind of process. I call cloud security the laundry, right? It just never ends, right? So a couple of things that I've heard from folks out there, cloud security requirements can put developers into a suspended state. Sometimes organizations cannot contribute to an open source data repository or code repository on GitHub or SourceForge or other places because you got some confidential information in your code or you got some architectural information that you cannot disclose. So it can create a lot of kind of interesting problems. And then, anything in the cloud platform native security side of things is basically, if you're trying to implement this for non-production environments, is always, a requirement. We are seeing that, developers from the very beginning really need to be conscious of security. So if your organization builds out, let's say S3 buckets, right, and developers leave these S3 buckets wide open and there's no protection on them and they're world writable and they're not encrypted, and the developers, DevOps or other folks just say, no, it's okay. We're gonna leave all these things open in our our lower level environments, right, like development, staging, quality assurance, and others, and we're going to fix all this stuff in production, that's a no, right? You can't really do that. We've seen organizations, using production data in lower level non-production environments, which basically exposes the organization to these types of issues, right? So you can lose data from an S3 bucket in a dev environment if you're using production data, so you have to have controls around that as well. So very important. Some of the pain points, right, that we see in this space, right? So again, data protection, as I mentioned, is always a huge issue. Information rights management, how you share data with your business partners, any kind of workload separation and multi-tenancy, especially in large organizations, MSSP kinds of environments is interesting. Network security is always good, how you kind of connect your on-prem environment or private cloud environment to your cloud environment. Identity and access management and privileged identity management, one of the largest issues, right? So from how admins can access the console of AWS, Azure, GCP, et cetera, all the way to how you represent your business users in your cloud workloads. These are all challenges, and how you administer this, again, is always going to be a problematic thing. Beyond these integration log and behavior analytics, security analytics is how you connect multiple clouds, cross clouds is interesting. Containerization, containers present a gigantic problem. Container escape, just monitoring system calls, privilege escalations, all that in a much, kind of more granular and much, more complex environment is interesting. Architectural questions, as I said, connectivity, setup, migrations, these are all going to be good questions. Basically, how your security supports the infrastructure as a service environment. And what I want to say here, right, is that if you have existing tooling, right, it's the probability of existing security tooling being insufficient to track and manage security in infrastructure as a service, AWS and Azure, is about 95%. So if you have on-prem tools and you're hoping that you'll be able to secure your cloud with those tools, it's just not going to be, unfortunately, possible. Beyond this, cloud workload protections, understanding, be above the hypervisor level, and guest OSs, containers, how malware, should not run, file integrity kinds of questions is important. And then configuration and security posture management, or CSPM. This is definitely an important thing. This is all about, understanding that your whole environment in the cloud and as well on the container level is going to be infrastructure as code, right? So it's basically auto-generated. All the configurations are auto-generated. And even, to modify these configurations, you might, be just clicking on buttons, right? It's not that somebody goes into the data center and kind of pulls out a rack and puts it back on, et cetera. So the responsibilities are fundamentally different here. I just wanted to kind of highlight this shared responsibility split model. The whole gist of it is that, basically as a client, you're managing things, OS, middleware, runtime, data, application, and then the provider manages all these things, the virtualization, server, storage, networking, and facilities. But it is also your responsibility on an infrastructure as a service platform to understand and manage the configuration, right, of all these blue boxes, right? And that is, that creates a significant challenge, because it's just very easy to kind of manipulate these things, right? You log into this admin console, you spin up another instance, copy the data from a production instance, and just walk away with it, like just, as an example, right? So infiltration, data exfiltration, lateral movement are very, very kind of difficult to catch in this environment. And again, misconfiguration had been for S3 buckets, instances, et cetera, behind all the problem, sources here. If we were to look at some of the various pieces of cloud platforms, as I said, in an infrastructure as a service environment. The console needs to be protected. The configuration of the artifacts of the instance, the storage, and as well as the network instances need to be protected. And then on the workload level, the containers, the network, and all the data also should be well protected. So again, these are the areas. Obviously, some of the security drivers here that we see would include, in our kind of looking around and asking customers to running surveys. Regulatory compliance is always there, right? If you want to be HIPAA compliant, if you want to be GLBA compliant, you have a SOX, to Type 2 kind of compliance requirement. If you have an ISO 27017, 27018 requirement, you are going to be much easier maintaining these types of compliance regulations that in the cloud than on-prem. Cost savings, again, data protection, breach prevention, access to the console, so must be limited. Risk profiling workloads, so you got to have visibility in a much more condensed and much more consistent manner, and understanding the risk profile of each workload, virtual machine, container, whatever service you might be using. And there's always changes to the platform and preventing misconfigurations. It comes back in these surveys as well. Some of the detail around what the configuration management challenges are for infrastructure as service platforms. So how do you prevent the monkey wrench falling into between the cogwheels kind of thing, right? So the SDLC and config management for the instance and compute, the storage and network areas. Having single visibility and just understanding the audit admin logs, who made what changes to what configuration artifacts to the instance storage and the network plane. Basically CI/CD integration, so how all this ties into the CI/CD pipeline or any changes in the scripts on the config of the CI/CD pipeline, and really identity and access management. This is all about who has access to the console, as well as, how do you have resources, access rights across each other, right? It's not just, which human being and which IAM admin can access, what resource, storage, compute instance or network instance or network policy artifact, right? But it's also about what other non-carbon based life form, right? Another instance or another database or another key can access other instances, right? And how this changes. Super difficult problem. I wouldn't even go as far as saying that you have anything even similar, or parallel in an on-prem kind of world. So if you look at data protection challenges in infrastructure as a service type of plane, right, these are always, encrypting data at rest, data classification, limiting data access, data leak prevention, data loss prevention, data activity monitoring, and obviously, key management. So some market trends in closing, right, that I want to kind of highlight here. The consolidation of vendors is always happening. We're seeing, vendors building stacks. Really looking at multiple deployment types, API, agent-based, and versus underlying kind of platform-based monitoring of config changes. Agent-based versus agentless, right? That's always a question. Some organizations want agents, others don't want agents. We're seeing an increasing number of organizations that say, look, there's just this sprawl of agents. Let's try to kind of cut back and centralize those and really unify and consolidate those agent frameworks. Regulatory compliance is unrelenting, right? So basically, each one of these regulations, HIPAA, GLBA, SOC, ISO, and then obviously there's country-specific regulations. They are changing nonstop, right? So you cannot really keep up with all this on your own as an end-user organization. Vendors are increasingly providing best practices templates as well as policy templates to meet these types of regulatory requirements. And then orchestration tool integration is always out there. Some best practices, right? So how you protect, instances, file integrity monitoring, templatization, as I said, any kind of intrusion detection prevention, anything around privilege escalation prevention is very important. You want to understand how things at a workload level change, system calls monitoring, anything around machine learning or AI for anomaly detection, less focus on signature-based detection and more on behavioral protection, and integrating with the CI/CD build pipeline. And as I said, all this is basically wrapped into a much, much better understanding of how the configuration artifacts of your cloud workloads actually change over time, checking for known good profiles, golden images, and basically understanding across multiple clouds how, these policy artifacts change. So with that, I'd like to conclude my part of today's presentation and hand it over to Patrick.
Oh, fantastic, Andras. This, so much meat in that 20 minutes. And I know we've set a bit of time aside at the end to have a bit of a three-way kind of chat. But just before we maybe turn to Jonathan and hear from him, I wanted to talk about just one observation, one quick one. And that is, in your slide around drivers to adoption, I was really surprised to see that regulatory and compliance requirements were the top of that list, right? You and I have seen the data behind that list, and maybe what wasn't super clear is that was a ranked order, and just about double of the respondents said regulatory and compliance requirements were a driver for them than the next categories of cost savings and data protection and breach prevention. I mean, that's telling, and I'm wondering, what you attribute that to.
Why is compliance on top of the list? So
yeah.
Let me put it this way. Yeah. The most immediate drivers in security, having observed this field for some time, are, there's two things, right? You got hacked, right? Or the auditor told you got to do something about this problem, right? Otherwise, you're subject to fines, subject to, sanctions, sure, and all these other things. You have to fix the problem. And to a great degree, right, this makes a lot of sense, right? This is obviously, yes, securing your customers' data, but there's always the kind of hesitation on behalf of end user enterprises, organizations that, hey, let's just wait, hope nothing will happen. And, when we hear about a fiasco, we'll fix things, that sure, we'll find out what others did misconfigured or did wrong. But, at the end of the day, if auditors are paying attention to this, and they are, right? So auditors are becoming surprisingly kind of savvy with all these types of things. Like, having seen all these past fiascos, right? It's no longer just, do you have two-factor authentication to the console? No. Do you understand what's going on there? Do you understand these artifacts? Do you understand the fine or green level details of who has access to what? So I think they're doing a service, right? A lot of organizations look at this as, oh my God, it's just another tax item on our cost kind of list, right? But in reality, this really, really helps in this world. And the other thing is that why compliance and audit is becoming even more of a helper here rather than an inhibitor. The observability of all these problems is basically, decreased by, 90% compared to any kind of an on-prem data center, right? So when you're in the cloud, are you going to be sitting in front of these kind of cloud, config consoles or scripts and check for like any change? No, you're not going to do that, right? In a patched environment, right? You got, in a legacy thing, you had a lot more human interaction in this, and you could, an IT admin could see if there was something wrong. You don't have that here.
Right. Yeah, and like you say, thankfully, failing an audit is still a lot more popular of an activity than a breach is. So, yeah, makes sense.
Exactly. Take your pick, right? Definitely.
Yes. Good. Well, with that, thank you so much, and we'll definitely get back to you as we sort of talk amongst ourselves in the next section. But before that, we want to hear from our next presenter. Jonathan's going to lead us through a discussion, a little bit of an intro about himself and Lemonade, and then a discussion about their Orca journey. So, thank you, Jonathan. Take it away.
You're welcome. Hi, my name is Jonathan Jaffe. I'm the Chief Information Security Officer at Lemonade Insurance. Lemonade is a high-tech insurance company. We were founded recently, just a little over about 6 years ago. We're a modern, very, very modern company. this market of insurtech, some of you may have known, focuses on using technology to create great efficiencies and serve a large customer base and pass those efficiencies on in the form of competitive rates. Lemonade provides insurance in the United States and increasingly in Europe. We're in 3 countries now. And we offer different types of insurance. We offer renters, homeowners, pet, and life insurance. Our approach is we feel that by using artificial intelligence, we can help detect fraud before it occurs. We also have a very, very interesting model, which is a give back program that says any money that wasn't claimed and returned to a customer for some harm that occurred actually goes to charities, nonprofits that the customers pick. So we drop that incentive of us wanting to hold on to claims. And the result is that we pay out, I think, 1/3 of our claims in 3 minutes automatically by a beautiful phone app. And the rest might take some human interaction, but we usually get them done pretty quickly. And as I mentioned, we operate and we're born in the cloud. And before I go on, I think I'm going to send the link out for this webinar to my parents, because Andras did such a fantastic job of explaining what my job looks like, and my family has never understood it. So this link is going out to them. He did it where I could have.
Definitely.
So as I mentioned, Lemonade was born in the cloud, and our infrastructure is almost entirely, it's pretty much entirely in AWS. We have a little bit of GCP. We leverage a cloud technology, but it's not just technology for the business. It really is the business. And so therefore, anything that happens to our cloud environment can bring the entire business down and really could be the death knell to it. So therefore, securing our cloud technology is critical. And while I appreciate what Andras said about compliance probably being on the minds of many CISOs, for us, it really is about just protecting the environment, protecting the data, and protecting the application. That is absolutely the first driver with what we do. Compliance is probably the 3rd down for us. Making everything secure really is our first goal. So Lemonade is interesting in terms of security and technology, but primarily because of the scale. And the scale, I think, is a topic that ultimately brought us to Orca. If you look at this graph and you look at the right-hand side, what you see is a great insurance company, USAA, and you see about how long it took them to get to 1 million customers. And then as you move to the left, you see all other really great insurance companies, and you see how long it took them. And you can see through modern technologies and cloud technologies specifically that we grew orders of magnitude faster, well, at least an order of magnitude faster than some of our competitors in a given period of time. And that could only have happened because of the scale of cloud. The problem with that, of course, is it brings a tremendous amount of complexity. And complexity is, by its nature, it's hard to secure, especially when things are not just growing rapidly, but they're changing. If you're deploying 100 different deployments a day, that's a lot of movement in a live system, and it can be very difficult to secure. For me, both where I'm at now and the prior company I was with, the initial problem that you have to solve is how do you know what's going on in your environment? And most products try to solve that for you first. Before you can stop an attacker, you have to actually know if there is an attacker in your environment. So visibility is key. If you can get good visibility, and that is a lot harder than vendors will let you know. The lead on that visibility is easy, but it's actually not. If you can get good visibility, then you have to prioritize your risks. And products that give you long lists of issues and don't help you prioritize them end up giving you an arm-length laundry list of tasks to do. And now you've got to figure out which ones do I do first. And that's hard to do when you can't rely upon all other departments because they're busy with what they're doing. You have to choose what you're going to target based upon risk. Now, another feature of or a challenge that you have to overcome is who's going to deploy the solution, because security typically doesn't own the solution. Usually DevOps or platform owns the deployment of a solution. So you have to get agreement with that team if you're going to get visibility and if you're going to get things fixed. So when I've looked at solutions, what I've done is I look at something that's going to be easy to deploy. It can't impact the environment. It has to be frictionless. It can't take work from the DevOps team because they're so busy just keeping the platform running that it's hard to get their attention. And if you can do it quickly and you can get a turnaround in 10 days, 15 days in results, that's a bonus. If you can get a turnaround in under an hour, it's a pretty great product. Now, the product also has to scale as your cloud presence changes. And I alluded to that before. When you've got 100 deployments going on a day and you're bringing up services and bringing them down, the solution has to expand. It can't miss anything. And then finally, you can't have your team suffer from alert fatigue. Otherwise, ultimately, alerts are ignored and those vulnerabilities stay in the cloud and you stay exposed. So a good product really has to just give you what you need to know as soon as you need to know it and prioritize lower priority issues much down on that laundry list. Now, I'm going to stop for a second and talk about a story. I tried out a different product at my prior company, Lacework, and it's a startup, and it's a good company. It was agent-based, as almost all products are, and I was convinced that agents were good. If you install agents, you're going to get really high fidelity, and so we deployed Lacework. The problem that we were finding is we were getting so many alerts that turned out to be false positives, and they were hard to chase down, that it wasn't really serving our needs. So a new startup came along, and that's Orca. Orca was new at the time, and I was introduced to it. And I thought, okay, well, I'll give them a shot and just let them do a proof of concept. We ended up running Orca side by side for about 4 months. As Orca was new, we were testing it out. Now, I had Lacework running for about a year, and I had assumed we had full coverage. When we brought in Orca, in the first 24 hours, we got a report back on their dashboard, and it said we had about 20 to 25% more assets in our system. So, of course, a young startup, I brought it back to them and said, look, you guys are clearly overcounting here. So they helped us look through the results, and then they said, have you checked with your DevOps team to see if your Lacework agents are being fully deployed? I thought, well, of course they are. They're in our Docker files, and there's not going to be an issue. Spent a couple of days and work with DevOps, and when I could finally get their attention, they said, oh, it looks like in staging where our developers are bringing up and down systems and they're not actually using the manifest that we create, it actually looks like we have about 20 to 25% of systems that aren't being covered by the agents. And therein lied the problem that I realized I didn't have the visibility I needed. So that was pretty significant. And I have to tell you guys, and it was at that point, about 4 months into it, when I realized the value of Orca, and I actually became an investor in the company. So at this point, I'm probably very biased towards Orca, and I want you to know that. But it's founded upon actual experience with a product that I found to be much better than what I was using at the time. So back to the presentation. The setup was quick. After we determined that Orca wasn't missing anything, we realized we were getting 100% visibility across all of our accounts. And it was well under 24 hours that we saw all these systems and we saw risks. The dashboard that Orca presented was actually the first dashboard I've seen in security where it didn't pride itself on showing me a ton of things with a bunch of red lights going off. It actually prioritized in chunks of 5 highest risks based upon their own internal algorithms and certain things that were close to the internet or maybe on the perimeter or had vulnerabilities that were more exploitable or known to have been exploited more frequently, to the damage they can do as an attacker can move laterally. And suddenly I knew what I had to do, or what our team had to do. And so we went about in attacking these problems that we probably had for over a year. So it was pretty meaningful, and we could chew through those tasks very quickly because we knew focus on this one, and then when that's done, focus on this one, and then this one. And suddenly our dashboard became very, very green. And that hadn't happened in over a year of another product. So, with that peace of mind and the ability to chew through risks, vulnerabilities, turned out to be a great product, and we ended up purchasing it. I brought that with me to Lemonade, but we did actually do another side-by-side analysis of Prisma, and we did invite Lacework to present what they had. And the end result is that Lemonade chose to go with Orca.
And we're so happy you did. Thank you, Jonathan. One of the things that I'm really glad you talked about in this order was sort of coverage versus install time, right? I think Orca is much like other modern cloud tool sets that install by role and policy, right? It's very quick when you compare it to software installation, right? But I think kind of the larger problem that it solves is really to your point, right? You don't know what you don't know in terms of coverage of agents, right? There's no way to see what isn't covered, right? Unless you have a real keen way to do software inventory and a lot of kind of, crunching of data, but you don't know what you don't know, right? And so I think for me, and one of the things I loved about Orca, before I joined, as I was learning about it, is, the installation is a one-time thing, right? And from that point on, Orca understands everything you debut in your account, everything that changes, but everything new that debuts, right? Without additional installation. And I think that's part of the secret sauce is, complete, guaranteed, assured coverage.
Yeah, no, that's right. It's the first time that I've actually used a product where I no longer worried about not being able to see all of my assets. And that is true. Agents I've used for years, and I repeatedly ran into this problem. This is the first time that I don't have that.
Fantastic. So we for sure have some questions, but I think just before we get there, because we have the time, let's set aside maybe between 5 and 10 minutes just for a bit of a chat. I didn't necessarily want to interrupt either of your flow, but I did have sort of questions that cropped up as you presented your content, as I'm sure you had. So let's just set aside a few minutes here to chat about that. And because of the power of the On24 interface, feel free to bring up slides and reference if you'd like to as you talk about them. But I'll kick this off, and then anyone please feel free to jump in. But the one thing I noticed that was really prevalent in both of your discussions and both of your content was the importance of minimizing the impact on other groups, and especially DevOps, right? DevOps, the birth of ideas often is in terms of deployment, like you say, Jonathan, it's either DevOps or platform, starts there. And we really do need their buy-in in whatever security strategy we employ, right? And obviously, as we make it easier and less friction for them, it's only good. But I'm interested from a practitioner perspective, how big of a challenge that really is.
Yeah, well, so DevOps is tasked with keeping the system up and running 24 hours a day, and that is their primary task. And in much of the world, security is because I have to. It's not because I want to. It's the way the world operates. And DevOps, they're essentially rewarded on making sure that our application isn't down. So developers get their attention more than security. If I want to deploy something, I have to move a little bit further back in line. I have to schedule that. So if I can get a tool that doesn't require DevOps time for more than 15 or 20 minutes, if at all, that's an easy win. They say, absolutely, go ahead. I don't, they'll buy me coffee for something that's easy. So it makes a big difference. When I was deploying agent-based solutions, I had to schedule it a couple of weeks ahead of time. We had to carve out a few hours, and we had to that was just for testing, and then we had to carve out more time for actual deployment. This works differently.
Yeah, and so I'm curious about kind of that wide view you've got, Andras, around that shift left, empower DevOps. I mean, is this a trend? Is this something that will change over time? Or are we here to stay? What does that look like from an industry perspective?
Absolutely, yeah. So a few things, right? So if you look at the entire paradigm change, right, or the entire kind of how do we secure our workloads kind of question, right? If you go back, into pre-DevOps times or DevSecOps times, right? Somebody in IT operations, procures the machines, you install the operating system, you patch the operating system, and then you got your developers. They kind of put on the jar files, they install the app servers, they kind of hope for the best. And speaking out of experience, right, nothing is ever the same between your dev, staging, QA, and production environment, right? So you kind of have to do these kind of deployments in every single environment, but a little bit differently, right? So you never can count on complete replicability. So that's one thing. Second, if you want to secure these things, these workloads, right, in every environment, you go ahead and patch, you put on your AV, you do your vulnerability scans, you do all these file integrity monitoring steps. So you basically instrument and do all these kind of all these environments individually and together. And then, as deployment moves on, right, you got software being installed, you got, the newest code base being rolled out to your production, dev, staging, QA, and production environments, right? You continue to patch, and if there is any kind of an issue in production, you basically, have to wait until there's a production downtime, and then you bring things down. So I think it's safe to say that you have security kind of living in their own world here, right? They do the patching, the monitoring, the SOC, the whole thing. And you got development, right? And there's some kind of interaction between these two teams, but not a lot. What I really think DevOps and DevSecOps brings a completely new dimension to this whole game is obviously infrastructure as code. So DevOps and DevSecOps actually can think about securing workloads at a time when IT security is not even in the conversation, or they're not even near this problem. So at the time things are being developed. So this presents a brand new opportunity, right? And a brand new challenge, obviously, but an opportunity to not treat security and patching and all these other things, as these add-on, additional later on kinds of activities, but from the whole, conception of the workload and the container, or how we plan to deploy, you have security, or you have the potential to imbue security into your configuration, into your workloads at the infrastructure as a service layer below that. So basically, the fact that you have infrastructure as code and all the deployment processes are also codified, right? And you can SDLC the code for these kinds of processes, presents an opportunity that is just unprecedented in the history of computing, if you ask me. There's no more boxes. There's no kind of reconfiguring, connecting, boxes with different network cables and pulling out, right? None of this stuff, right? It's all a script, and you can fix it, and you can ensure the security is there. So having said this, there's a lot of DevOps organizations that actually realize this, right? And say, hey, since we are ultimately responsible for application security, we want to be participants of the security of the workloads process. We do not want to leave all this to IT security purely. Other organizations, and then so DevOps may be kind of initiating this process. In other organizations, right, you might have, like an IT security organization that is working in collaboration with the DevOps, and they take care of all this. which is probably the way this should be. But there's a lot of kind of newer companies where DevOps can definitely, if this is 90% of your workloads are cloud-based, which they are moving in that direction, I wouldn't go as far as you don't need IT security at all, right? I mean, that's probably going to extremes. But the role of IT security in the day-to-day operations and in securing workloads is going to be, much less than it has been before. So that's the kind of gist of it, and really. As I said, it's an unparalleled opportunity to think ahead and do things right. The shift left scanning of image vulnerability for container images and other OS images, it's just all good, goodness. And no more patching, no more kind of retroactive fixing things in production environments. If something is not working well, you decommission the production images one after the other, and you push a newly configured and fixed image into production.
Right. Sort of immutable infrastructure, right? Fix the problem at the source. Yeah, certainly it seems like the role of security is shifting, literally shifting left, but maybe staying more there. Certainly as these workloads live in production, right, we still need to consider them for, poorly aging software and the risks that kind of develop over time, for sure. But I think the focus on the source is paying massive dividends, for sure. Jonathan, did you have something?
No, although I was thinking, there's always an emphasis on production, but I actually don't differentiate between the two very much. Two types of attacks. One is where somebody ultimately wants to get your data and probably extort you to pay with threats. And so, yes, production is relevant. But anytime you have a cloud environment, that environment, exploitation of any environment, staging, sandbox, playground, whatever you want to call it, IT, they're all equally valuable to an attacker, because even if that environment can't be exploited as a Bitcoin miner, which is, a bit of a cliche these days, it can be exploited for lateral movement. It can be exploited for many other purposes. So I don't actually treat them differently, other than I have an additional focus on data in a production environment.
Right. Yeah, but all the infrastructure controls and everything should be the same, and if they're not, there's a problem. Yeah,
that's right, and so and that's why you, as Andras said, you write it as code and you apply the same code everywhere as you stand up a new account. Right.
One of the things in Andras, in your content, you talked about workload separation, and you certainly talked about it in the context of multiple tenancy, but can we consider the proliferation of sort of microsegmentation in that problem bucket as well? Because, I think you said it best. Sometimes you'll walk into an inventory of a cloud environment, and you will have thousands and thousands and thousands of infrastructure pieces, all with security controls, right? That for a very modest sized environment, and security groups and microsegmentation is a large part of that. We talk about the power of that, right? How we can get real fine-grained controls over different workloads, different tiers and classifications of information, which is great. But the problem side of that is you go from having, pairs or double digits of firewalls to manage in a data center to literally thousands and tens of thousands of these, security controls around, if not every workload, every function. I mean, that's a management challenge into itself.
Yes, totally. Yeah, absolutely. I mean, again, this will largely depend on the appetite and functional kind of requirements, right, of every single customer, right? I mean, that's security risk appetite, right, and functional requirements. Yes, I mean, installing traditional firewalls, WAFs, and all these other traditional security instances is not going to be sustainable, right? And this is another kind of mind shift, right? Where, the old school mechanism of zero trust was that, let's just kind of plug in as many boxes into as many kind of concentrators and hope for the best, right? And, kind of reconnect everything and reconfigure the connections as you see fit, right? So that's the question here too.
Fantastic. If there's no other sort of discussion points, if someone wants to make one, great. If not, maybe, Mike, we can move to Q&A.
Yeah, absolutely. We've got a number of questions already from the audience, but again, everybody feel free to submit your questions. There's a little box right below the speaker window on your On24 interface. Submit your questions. We've got about 11 minutes to get through as many as we can. Looking through, we actually have a number of questions about the agentless component here, so I'm going to try and get through a few of those. Some of them will be quick, some of them maybe a little bit more in depth. But this was a quick one. Is Orca agentless for both container as well as VM environments?
Yeah, I'll take that one. Sure.
Okay, yeah.
Go ahead, please,
Go ahead, Patrick. No. Since you work for Orca, you know better than I do. But the quick answer is yes.
That's right. But basically the whole answer, yes. So, containers running on hosts, containers running under, managed Kubernetes, containers running under ECS, kind of the more proprietary orchestration, all supported. So containers as well as, containers and registries and machine images as well, as we think about kind of the journey to shift left.
Okay, excellent. So no agents at all, basically.
Correct. Yeah. No agents anywhere.
Another question that I had in there that whoever answered that, you should ask that answers that one.
Great.
This one would be for Andras. This question is, given Andras's comments around the importance of behavior anomaly detection over signature or rule-based breach detection. All right. Sorry, I heard a little interference there. How would you propose addressing that requirement? If you need me to reread that, Andras, please let me know.
No. So what's the kind of behavioral aspects, right? So the behavioral aspects, right, are always going to be interesting, right, in an environment. There are two schools of thought, right? One is that you want to rely on behavioral systems and analytics as to determining and figuring out normalcy in operations, right? The other kind of school of thought is that rules are better because it's just like much more understandable concepts and constructs to manage, right? I think behavioral tools are good. If you have a huge number of artifacts and if you have a very elastic and ephemeral type of systems with very little and you don't have a lot of people who can manage them.
Okay.
If I can comment on that, because I went from a behavioral system, one that studied behavior and promised to actually look for anomalous behavior and identify detections that way, and it didn't work. And that could be because of the product was it good enough, or it could be because that area is just not developed well enough, or perhaps there wasn't enough data coming in. But there were two problems. The fundamental problem was ultimately it never surfaced anything that wasn't a false positive, or if it wasn't a false positive, we couldn't find it. But the other problem was it took, on average, we were told it would take 14 to 30 days to normalize behavior. That's a problem that you don't see results very quickly. But the other problem is what if during that time you actually have a persistent attack and that becomes part of your normalized behavior? It doesn't account for that. That was another reason why I ended up leaving that type of solution.
Okay, thanks, Jonathan. A couple more technical questions here. Okay, what options exist to fit Orca into my existing processes, and will it integrate with my SIM? And how about my CI/CD process? I'm assuming that means development and integration, but Patrick, maybe that one's more for you.
Sure. Yeah, I think the heart of the question is more like, how extensible is Orca? So we have a large library of integrations. So, your central kind of log aggregation SIM strategy, we've got support for all the big ones and even some of the smaller ones. Workflow tools, auto ticketing is really popular. As an alert comes in from Orca, we can fit into your Jira or your ServiceNow sort of auto ticketing system. You certainly don't need to think about reinventing the wheel there. But then kind of more broadly, we're an API first sort of product. So you'll see functionality show up in our API before you see it in the UI, which makes sense. The UI is an implementation of the API. But, that's just to say that the API has got great documentation. Many customers kind of use it, again, to fit into processes that they already have. So lots of options there for sure.
Okay, excellent. And any comments, Jonathan, or would you like to continue?
Yeah, so we have not yet integrated Orca into our SIEM. We've moved from a traditional SIEM to Datadog. And so as much as I love the product, I'm still not feeding data into Datadog, and I'm hoping an integration comes out. So there's still areas for the product to improve.
Okay, excellent. Okay. Another one about the agents. And this is, don't agents give you more visibility than side scanning? I think that could go to Patrick or any of you.
Maybe I'll let Jonathan take that one.
As a practitioner. Yeah, because I have this discussion. I have this discussion a lot when I was deciding what to go with. And the problem was, yes, agents gave me more visibility, but they only gave me visibility to where they were installed. So that was one problem, is I didn't have full visibility. They had more fidelity, but as it turned out, like when I looked at Prisma and I dealt with Lacework, I don't need that fidelity. That fidelity is actually just a lot of noise. What I need to know is what is important right now and what shows possible imminent compromise. I really don't need to inspect every packet in order to know that there's lateral movement. Orca has found a very interesting way to see that, and they can track movement from host to host, and you don't have to be listening to, you don't have to open up a file descriptor, listen on a network port to do that. So the visibility with agents can be higher fidelity, but it's not as wide. It's part of the problem. You just don't have the coverage. But then the fidelity is actually not something that I want anymore. What I want is just tell me what I need to know and tell me how I fix it.
Okay, excellent. Okay, less noise is better, right?
Definitely.
Okay. Another deployment question, and this is, how do you secure Orca's access to your cloud environment? I guess obviously deploying that is giving access to your assets. How do you secure that itself?
Yeah, it's a good question, and probably warrants a practitioner's answer again. But Orca's deployed using, and this is across clouds really, using a policy, how much permission you give Orca in your account, and then a way for Orca to sort of assume a role that's tied to that policy. So, as you install Orca, you get full visibility into everything that we see, and it is relatively broad, right? Because the product is expanding in sort of what it can see all the time, much like a CSPM's goal is to sort of look broadly across as many services as you consume on the cloud and make sure it can tell you about the security, knobs and controls associated with all those services. And Orca definitely does that, but it is, it's read-only access. There's absolutely no ability to affect anything in your account, right? So it's through that access that Orca asks all the questions of the cloud provider through that API, but then also does that side scanning, right? Can look at those drives, process them. If that data is encrypted, can decrypt that data, right? That's one of the permissions you give Orca, but it's all held in that policy, which is fully auditable by our customer.
Excellent. Okay, another one coming in here. We've got time for a couple more, maybe. I've got a small team that's just making the transition from data center to cloud security. What should their top 3 concerns or focus areas be? And I don't know if, Andras, if you want to chime in on that one?
Yeah, totally. Scale, right? It is, scalability and data protection, right? So how you're going to make sure that you can answer auditors' question around, how you encrypt your data at rest, make sure you manage your keys and all these other kind of normal things, which you'd have to answer on-prem as well. But in the cloud, your visibility will be more limited, right? So, or better, depending on how you construct things. So I think cloud governance is definitely probably one of the top requirements. You have to make sure that you do not open the barn door, right? And let the horses leave the barn without putting controls on your workloads and understanding their configuration, understanding what's going on in them. So, you kind of have to do this preventatively and proactively in the environment, and not wait until all the environment is actually moved to the cloud and then you try to retrofit the instrumentation there. Right? So that's a second thing. And the whole identity story and the configuration management that I talked about earlier are probably, tied for third place here. Yeah.
And do you mind if I respond to that as well?
No, please do. Please.
I think, given that you have a small team, whoever asked the question, and you're about to move into the cloud, the first thing is to make sure that your DevOps approach is building and maintaining the infrastructure through code and only code. It really works, and it works well. So therefore, you have a consistent approach to all of the infrastructure, but from your perspective as the manager of security, so you can make sure security groups are appropriate, and they're appropriate everywhere. And then the next thing you need something, in some sense, I guess I'm here to plug Orca. You need something that, like Orca, that is actually going to give you visibility, because without visibility, you have no idea what to work on. So the next step is getting something that's going to give you full visibility in your system.
Okay, excellent. Gentlemen, that hour flew by. Great discussion. I enjoyed it, and I'll leave it to you guys for any parting words before we sign off for the day.
Nothing for me. Just thank you so much to our two our guests for the presentation and the commentary. I learned a lot, and I appreciate your time. Thank you very much.
Yeah, thanks everybody. I enjoyed it.
Sure.
And I hope everyone did too. Again, you'll get a link to watch it on demand. Shortly after it will be available if you wish to share with your colleagues. But gentlemen, thank you. Hope everyone stays safe, and hopefully we can all be doing these events in person someday soon.
Thanks a lot, everybody.
Absolutely.
Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Bye.
All right. Thanks, guys.
Bye-bye.
Thank you.